What's going on, everyone? My name is Hunter, and welcome to the second episode of the SvelteKit and PocketBase series, where we'll build and deploy a full stack application using SvelteKit and PocketBase. In this video, we're going to be adding user profile settings to our application, and the profile settings are going to give our users the ability to upload a custom avatar, as well as change their name. We're then going to build off of these settings in the following videos, where we'll add account and security settings, which are going to enable our users to change their email, username, and password. If you'd like to start off with the code I have here today, there will be instructions in the GitHub repo README link below, and you're going to want to clone episode 1's code, as that's the starting point for this episode. Now, before we actually get started with implementing our settings pages, we make a small adjustment to our layout.svelte, our root layout, and we're going to adjust this padding Y from 10 to 4. I realized after I recorded the previous episode that this was a little bit excessive, so let's knock that down to 4, and then we're good with that file. And then we can come into our routes, and we're going to create a couple things. We're going to create a new directory called my, and then another directory called settings, and then we're going to add a plus layout.svelte to that. Now in this layout file, we're actually going to define our nested layout that's going to apply to all of our settings pages, and it's going to inherit from our root layout. So if you're not sure how nested layouts work, I do have a video on layouts in SvelteKit that you can check out to become more familiar with that. But I know we're going to need data from the root layout, so we can export let data. So then inside of this layout, we're going to create a basic sidebar as well as a title. So let's start off with the title. We're going to set up a div for that. It's going to have a width of full, a height of full, and a little bit of padding. And then we're going to add an H3 here. That's just going to say settings. And then underneath of that, we'll actually have a divider. So we'll say div.divider, which is a Daisy UI class. And then we'll be setting up our sidebar menu. And again, this is going to be a Daisy UI menu. I've just modified it a bit to suit our needs, but we'll set up the div for it, and then we're going to set up the menu itself. And then for the list items, what we want to do is we're actually going to set up a navigation array, and it's going to have a bunch of nav objects in it, right? And that way we can just easily edit that without having to copy and paste down a bunch of different LIs individually. So let's go ahead and set this up. So we'll just say const navigation equals an array, and it's going to be an array of objects. It's going to have a title, which is what's going to display on the nav link. So we'll say the first one's going to be profile. And then we're also going to have an href, which is going to be where does that link take you to? And it's going to be my/settings/profile. And then we can simply copy this down 2 more times for our other 2 menus we're going to need, which are account and then security. So then we'll come back down to our UL and we'll start to add some LIs. But first, let's say each navigation as nav item. And then we're going to add an LI with an A tag, and the href is going to be the nav item.href, and the class is going to be font medium. And then for the title, we're just going to say nav item.title. So we should render an individual nav item out for every single navigation link. So then if we want to add a link in the future, all we have to do is update this, and then it will render out the link accordingly. So now we also need to add a div with a class of width full, and then a slot here. That's where all of our settings pages are going to fit into. Another thing that we should probably do is set up a layout.server.js file. And then what this is going to do is this is actually going to redirect the users if they are not logged in. So we'll say export const load. We'll take in locals, and then we'll say if not locals.pb.authstore.isValid. So if it's not valid, we want to throw a redirect, which comes from SvelteJS/kit to the login page, because anything under my settings, the user is going to have to be authenticated for. So we can go ahead and take care of that here. We'll also add it in the individual pages as well, because if you are not aware, the load function or the layout load function only loads when the layout first loads. So when you're navigating within pages inside of that same layout, the layout.server.js load function does not load again. So we need to still add the auth checks to all of our pages so we can properly protect them. Okay, so let's also add a plus page.server.js here as well. And what this is going to do is it's going to redirect them to a specific settings page, because we're not going to have a root settings page. So let's go ahead and do this as well. Let's create a new 3 new directories. We're going to create an account / and then we'll say plus page.svelte. And then we'll just copy this twice for our profile and our security settings. So now in this page.server.js, what we can do is we can say export const load. We're going to take in locals, and then we're going to say if there's no locals.pb.authstore.isValid, we can throw a redirect to the login page. And then else, we're going to throw a redirect to the my/settings/profile page. And what this will do is if someone goes to oursite.com/my/settings, it's just going to redirect them to the profile. That's going to be like our default settings page. We just want them to all have that nice URL. Okay, so we're actually getting an error here. We're not actually using this at all, I guess, on this page at the moment. So we can remove that, and then we can go into our profile, page.svelte, and then we can go ahead and start to set up the structure of what one of our settings pages is going to look like. So we'll set up our structure. So we'll say div.flex.flexCall with full and height full. We're then going to add a form. And the action is eventually going to be /update profile. And then the method, of course, is going to be post. And this is going to contain everything for our profile inside of this single form here. So then we can actually set up a title inside of this as well. And this will say update profile. And then we will start to set up our input fields. But let's just first take a look at what this looks like. So let's go ahead and log in with one of our users. Okay. And then if we go to settings here, we can see that this is what this looks like. And one thing we can actually do as well is right now you can see that we don't actually have no indication as to what page we're on this side menu here. And Daisy UI has a class called active that we can take advantage of that'll set the active page. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. And that's going to be back inside of our layout.svelte, and it's going to be for this. So we're going to have a font medium. And then what we can do is we can actually access the current URL path name, which is going to match this href here. And we can get access to that if we import page from app/stores. And then if we come in here and we can just say $page.url.pathname. If it's equal to the current nav item.href, then we want to add the active class here. If not, we want to just do nothing, right? So now if we save this, we go back to our app here, you can see that we now have profile, account, and security. And then whenever we click on any one of these, whichever one is the active page, will be highlighted purple. So cool. Okay, now let's go back to actually setting up our profile page. So go back into the profile page, and then we're going to come underneath of the update profile. What we want to do is we're actually going to first show the profile picture. So let's just go ahead and set up a quick form control here. And we'll add a label, and it's going to be for is going to be avatar, right? And the class is going to be label. The font will be medium, and the padding bottom will be 1. And then we're going to just say profile picture here, and that's going to be above our profile picture. So now we can actually render out the avatar itself. And to do so, we can just say label 4 is going to be avatar again. The class is going to be avatar, width of 32, and rounded as full. Okay, and then inside of this label, we're actually going to set up the display of our avatar. So we'll just set up a div with a class of width 32, and we'll do rounded full so that we actually have a circular avatar. And then the image tag is going to be sourced is going to be, we're just going to use a placeholder image right now. And the alt will be user avatar. Let me actually close this off. So let's see how that looks. Okay, so this is what we're working with currently. And we can see that we have a profile picture here. And did I forget a class somewhere? I think I did. Yep. So inside of this profile picture, I actually need to I need to open up a span tag and say profile picture. And then this is going to have a class of label-text. And that's going to make it a little bit smaller there. I think that's what I need to do, right? Oh, it's because I'm so zoomed in. That's why it looks extra big. I'm pretty zoomed in right now because I'm trying to make sure everybody can see, and it looks a little bit big. So we have the profile picture there. It's obviously not the actual user's avatar. We'll get there when we get there. But right now we want to kind of set up what it's going to look like. So then underneath of this label here, and while we're still within this same div and still within the form, what we want to do is we actually want to set up an input, and this is going to be our file input, right? So it's going to be input type of file. And it's going to be, the name is going to be avatar, and the ID is also going to be avatar. The value is going to be an empty string for now. We're going to accept only image/star, which basically only accept image files, right? It's also going to be hidden, and then we should be good there on the input. So now when I click on this, you can see that it does open up my Windows Explorer here to select a file. So that's what we're doing there. And we can actually add a class to one of these labels here to actually set up a proper hover. And I think we can do it to this one here. So we can say hover cursor pointer. And that way when we hover over this, it's indicating that we can click on this to actually select a logo or an avatar. But that's not really this doesn't really, I guess, tell the user, hey, you can change this. So what we want to probably do is add an icon to this in the bottom right or something that they can click on, and then it'll have an edit, pencil button. So what we can actually use for this is we can actually use Svelte Hero icons. And we can install this like such. And then in order to use it, we just say icon source equals, and then they import the icon. So we have access to all of the hero icons. And I think I can get access to those here. So let's go ahead and install this package. Okay, so that's installed. Now let's go ahead and find one of these icons. So we can just say pencil probably. And this one will do for now. So I'm going to need to import pencil, an icon from hero icons. So let's go up to the top, open up some script tags and say import icon pencil from Svelte hero icons. And then we're going to put this pencil in between these labels here. So we're actually going to go underneath of this label. We're going to open up another label, and it's going to have a class of absolute and also a bottom 0.5 and right negative 0.5, right? So we're going to go off of the bottom and off of the right a little bit of from the avatar itself. And then this is also going to be for avatar. And then we also want to add the hover cursor pointer here as well. And then within this, we can set up a span tag, which is going to be a button, button circle, button small, and then button secondary to change the color. And then we'll add our icon. All right, so let's see how this looks. Let's go back to our application. And now we can see this is a little bit more indicative of what you can do with this profile picture. You can click on this or you can click on this. It doesn't really matter. Either way, when we click on it though, if we go to avatars and I pick myself here, you can see that this obviously doesn't change because we're currently getting this from somewhere else, right? So how can we show a preview to the user when they upload a picture? Well, that's going to be something we're going to set up here in our script tags. So we'll set up a new function up here and we're going to call it const show preview. It's going to take in an event. This event is obviously going to be the on change event of our input. And then we'll say const target equals event.target. And the files, const files is going to be equal to target.files. And then if the files.length is greater than 0, so basically if there's a file, the source is going to be the url.createObject URL. And we're going to pass in the index 0 of those files. And then we'll set the preview is going to be equal to document.getElement by ID. And then we actually need the ID of the avatar image source itself. So we actually need to give this an ID. So we'll make this ID equals avatar, say avatar preview. And then we'll pass that ID here. And then we can say preview.source equals source. So we're creating a URL object here out of the files if there is one, right? And then we're defining where do you want the preview to go? We want to get the avatar preview image tag here. And then we're going to set that image tag's .source to this URL that we just got from the files, right? So now what we can do is we can save this and then we can say image source and then we can say on change. Well, actually on the input itself, we're going to say on change and we'll just say show preview. So now let's just try to upload something now. And now you can see that we do in fact get the preview rendered. Obviously, when we refresh the page, we're not sure what happened there. Oh, my application is stopped. So unknown file extension for hero icons. Let's just save our Svelte configuration. I think that will fix that piece there. So now if I upload a picture again, and then I refresh the page, you can see that obviously it gets reset because we're not actually pulling the image from our account just yet, okay? But we do have the preview functionality working. So I also mentioned that we want to add the name here. We'll be able to change the user's display name or the name that they put in, not the username, but the name that they added when they created the account. So we're going to need an input for that. And actually, since we're going to need inputs for a few more things, it's probably best to go ahead and create a component so we're not copying and pasting inputs all over the place, right? So let's go ahead and go into our lib directory and we're going to create a new file or a new directory called components. And then inside of components, we're going to create a new file called icon or input.svelte. Sorry about that. And we'll set up some script tags where we can get our props. We're going to need a value for sure, right? We can set the default to an empty string. We're also going to take in a placeholder, which is also going to be an empty string. We're going to need an ID, which we're not going to set a default to. So they will have to pass in an ID. We're also going to take in a label, which we will not set a value for either. We'll take in a type, which will default to text. And then for the disabled, we'll default this to false. And then for required, we'll also default this to false. so that they can override these if they'd like. And then we'll set up a div with a class of form control, width of full, max width large, and margin bottom 2. We'll add a label. It's going to be for, it's going to be ID, right? The class is going to be label, font medium, and padding bottom 1. And then inside of this label, we're going to have a span, which is going to have the label text. And we'll just use that label that the user passed in here. And then we can actually just set up our input. Now for type, we're going to actually say, let's see here, let's go down here and actually start to add the props this way. So we'll say type is equal to type. We can actually just do the shorthand like this. Type, we'll say placeholder, required, disabled, and we'll say ID. And then for name, we'll do name equals ID, and then the value like this. Okay, so then we can use this throughout our application to make sure we have consistent forms, because I know that we're using max width medium elsewhere, and I think that it's gonna be best to just make it large. You can obviously extend this however you'd like. This is just a very basic component here that we're gonna set up. Okay, so now we can go back into our profile settings page here, and then we can put the input underneath of this div here within the form itself. So we can say input, and actually, before we do that, let's go ahead inside of our components here. Let's just create an index.js file, and we'll say import input from /input.svelte, and then we'll export input. And what this will allow us to do is we won't have to do a bunch of import statements within any of our files that have multiple components. We can simply import them like this. We can just say import input from lib/components. So now we can come down here and say input, and then we're gonna need to pass in those values, right? So we're gonna need the ID, which is going to be equal to name, because this is gonna be the name field, right? The label is gonna be name, and the value is going to be equal to data.user.name. Disabled is going to be, we already have that set to default as false. And then we can actually just close this off, and that should be all that we need. We also need to accept data because we're getting that from our layout load function. And I think we should be good on this input. So let's check it out. So you can see here that we get an input with the name already populated, and we can go back and start to add the button as well. So we'll just add a div with a width of full, max width of large, some padding at the top, and then we'll add a button. Okay, so this is what our update profile page looks like at the moment. I know it's not the prettiest. You can obviously extend the style, make it look a little bit better, but I think this looks fine for what we're trying to do here. So now what we actually need to do is implement the functionality of actually updating the user's profile, right? And in order for us to upload the avatar, we actually need to submit multi-part form data. And if we come to PocketBase's documentation, you can see that for file uploads and handling, it says that once added, you can create and update a record and upload documents by sending a multi-part form data request using the records create update APIs. The client API makes it a bit easier to auto-detect the request content type based on the parameters, but we're going to just be passing the multi-part form data. So let's go ahead and set that up inside of our actions. So inside of profile, we need to make a new file called pluspage.server.js, and this is where we're going to have our actions. We're going to export const actions, and then we're going to set an action, export const actions. And then we're going to set up an action called update profile. It's going to be asynchronous, and we're going to take in request and locals. And then we're going to say let data equals await request.formData. Right, and that's going to give us a form data object, which is what PocketBase is expecting us to send if we're going to be uploading images. So now what we can do is we can say try await locals.pb.collection. We're going to say the user's collection, right? We're going to update, and it's going to expect an ID of that user as well as the data that we're looking to update. So we're going to pass in the locals.user.id and then data, which is that form data object here that we pulled from our form. Then we'll catch any errors that we get, and we'll just console log them and then throw an error. And then if everything works, what we'll do is we'll just return success is true. Okay, so before we can actually submit this form, what we need to do is we actually need to come back into our page.svelte for our profile, and we actually need to update our form, and it has to have ink type equals multi-part form data. right? Because that's what PocketBase just told us that it's expecting when we upload an image. So now we should be able to test this out. So let's go in here and let me just select a picture of Iris here. And then we'll also change the name to Iris J. We'll click update profile. As you can see, the name went back and the profile picture obviously is not currently set to anything. It's set to that URL. So we can actually just go inside of PocketBase and see what happened. So if we refresh our users, we can see that the avatar is there and Iris J, the name was updated. So we understand why the avatar didn't update inside of our application, but why didn't the name update? Well, if we look here at the Svelte documentation, we can see that it says that the handle runs before the action is invoked and does not rerun before the load functions. This means that if, for example, you use handle to populate event.locals based on a cookie, you must update event.locals when you set or delete the cookies in an action. In our case, right, so the handle function runs before the action, but it doesn't run before the load after the action. Right? So that means that our event.locals.user is not currently being updated before that load function is triggered. So what we can do is we can actually go back into our page.server.js and we can come into our try catch block here. And what we'll do is we'll actually get the name here from this. So let's just say const name. And we'll also get the avatar as well, because that's going to be updating too once we actually set that up. So we'll get the name and the avatar from this user, right? And then we'll set the locals.user.name to name and locals.user.avatar to avatar, right? So let's come back into our application. Let's test this out. Let's rename her back to Iris Johnston and we'll update profile. And we can see right away that something went wrong, right? And we can see that the error is with an avatar. And that's because if you recall inside of our profile form, we actually set avatar's default value to an empty string, which is what gets passed anyways with anything inside of a form. So right now, as it currently stands, data is a form data object and it has an avatar as an empty string and it has our name as whatever the name field was. So obviously it's not expecting an empty string. And if we take a look here, let's just console log data.get avatar. And then if we click update profile here and we look at this, we can see that it's a blob with a size of 0 and a type of application octet stream. So let's come into our PocketBase logs here and we can see that avatar, the following MIME types only are allowed, which are all the image files that we specified that PocketBase specified under the avatar file inside of that collection. So we're trying to pass application/octet stream, right? So what we can do is we can actually set something up here to check to see if the size is 0. And then if it is 0, we want to remove that field. We don't even want to pass that over to PocketBase. So if they don't change their avatar, we don't want it to update. So what we can do is we can say const user avatar equals data.get avatar. That's going to grab our avatar from there. And we can say if avatar.size is equal to 0, then we want to say data.delete avatar, right? So if the size is 0, we want to delete it. If not, we want to send it over. And then obviously there's going to be other validations that we're going to implement later on, like as far as checking the size of the image to make sure somebody's not uploading something that's too big or too small or not the right types. We can do a lot of that here as well. That'll come in a future video. But for now, I think this should be good. We should be able to save this and it should work. So let's go back to our app and let's update the name again. And it says avatar is not defined. Whoops, we need to do user avatar dot size. Apologize for that. And then if we update it again, we can see that the name did change, right? We didn't have to refresh the page or the page refreshed, but we actually populated it again instead of our action. And we can see that the avatar obviously is still not populating because we haven't set that up. So let's go ahead and do that now as well. So we look back at the PocketBase documentation here, we can see that we access our images with a URL. So basically it only stores inside of user.avatar, for example, it's just the file name. It doesn't actually store the whole image right there. So we actually have to make a separate request to this API for the file, passing in the collection ID or name, the record ID, and the file name. And we also have an optional thumbnail we can pass in here as well. And then if the thumbnail that we pass in is not found, it'll return the original file. So what we can do is we can actually set up a helper function inside of our utilities that'll actually generate that image URL. So we can say export const get image URL, and then we'll pass in a collection ID, a record ID, a file name, and a size. And that size will be set, we'll default that to 0 by 0 because that's never going to exist. Therefore, if somebody doesn't pass in a size or a thumbnail size, then it's just going to get the original image. And then we can say return. And all we're going to return is we're just going to construct a URL here. So we'll say localhost 8090 /API /files. And then we'll say collection ID. And then it wanted the record ID. And then it wants the file name. And then here we can do question mark thumb equals size. And that will give us a image URL using the information that we pass it here. So then inside of our actual profile form, what we can do is instead of having this placeholder image here, we'll check to see if they have an avatar. And then if not, we'll generate like a random dummy avatar for them with using their name. So what we can do to accomplish this, what we can do is we can say data.user.avatar. So basically, is this true? If it is, then we want to say get image URL, which we need to import from utils. And then we'll pass it in, first it needs a collection name, right? So we can get data.user.collection name or collection ID. It doesn't matter. We'll just do collection ID because that's what we specified in the function. And then we'll pass in the data.user.id here. And then we'll pass in the data.user.avatar. And then for the size, we can leave that blank because we haven't set up any thumbnails. So right now it's getting the collection ID, the record ID, which is the ID of the user, and then the avatar, which is the file name that it's looking for, right? And we're not going to pass the size in, so it'll just default to the original image. And then otherwise, so if there's no avatar, we're going to say https uiavatars.com/API, and then we can pass in name equals data.user.name. We actually need to make this backticks here so we can actually pass this in. So we can say data.user.name, right? So now it should show a placeholder avatar or the actual avatar itself. So if I log out of Iris here and I log in with Walt, and then I go into his settings here, we can see that we now just get the WW instead of an actual picture of Walt White. So we can apply that same logic or that same source tag here to our layout, which will update this picture here. So let's go back into our layout real quick and take care of that. So instead of using this as our source, we'll just use this. We need to obviously import get image URL. And then now if we look at our application, we can see that is pretty cool, right? So then we go back with Iris. And we can see that we have Iris here in the top right corner, and we have her settings, and they're all being updated just as expected. So now let's go ahead and set up progressive enhancement for this form that way, because right now the page just reloads every time we submit something, right? So if I do this, you can see that the full page is reloading. Let's actually clean that up with use enhance. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're actually going to set up a function, and we'll say const submit update profile that we're going to pass into use enhance. And actually what we need to do is we need to actually define loading here. So we'll say let loading, and then we're going to make this reactive, and we'll say loading equals false by default. And then we'll set loading to true right off the bat. So as soon as it starts this function, we're going to set loading to true. That'll enable us to disable our inputs and our submit button so someone isn't spam clicking it while it's still submitting. We'll return async, and we're going to get the results from that. And then we'll set up a switch case. We'll say switch result.type, and we'll say case is success. Then we want to await invalidate all, which we actually need to import from app/forms. And then we also need to go ahead and import, app/navigation for invalidate all. And we're also going to import use enhance and apply action from app/forms. So we can come here, we say invalidate all, and then we'll break, and then we'll have case of error where we'll break. And then for case of anything else, we'll just do a default, and we'll just say await apply action results. Again, if you're not sure what all of these are doing, my video on form actions will definitely help you understand this a bit better. And then before we finish this function here, we want to set loading to false. Okay, so now we should be able to update our form. Where is it? It's here. we could say use enhance, and then we can say equals submit update profile. And then what we can also do is we can disable these inputs. So we can say disabled equals loading. And then the same thing for this one. So basically, if loading is true, disabled is also true. And then we'll do the same thing for this button. Okay, so I think that should be good. Everything looks good to me. Let's go ahead and test this out. So if I update this name now, it's gonna be really quick, but let's just take one of these characters off and I click update profile. You don't even really notice that it's disabled. However, if I, for example, set my network performance to slow 3G, right? And then I click on this, let's just change it back again. You'll see that now it's disabling the inputs, right? And it's taking its sweet time to update. So that works. Fantastic. So I think that's going to conclude today's video. So we were able to successfully set up our settings layout, went ahead and set up our profile settings page. We're able to preview the image on upload. We're able to successfully upload an avatar for the user. We're able to change their name. We also were able to set the avatar to show up in both the profile settings page as well as in the nav bar. And then also we're checking to make sure that the user doesn't accidentally, not change their avatar and then delete it, right? So we're doing that check inside of the action itself. So in the next video, we're going to work on account and security settings, where we're going to be able to change the username, change the email, and then also change the user's password. So I look forward to that video and I will see you all in the next one.